Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Infernus, and welcome back to another comic book review. Let's end off this trio of Thanksgiving break reviews with Black Widow, the Phase 4 movie that should have been in Phase 3 but wasn't in Phase 3 for reasons that I don't know. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes at Marvel, so for all I know, they probably just didn't think to make a Black Widow movie until after the character died. Who knows? What's interesting about this one, though, is that while both Captain Marvel and Far From Home got a little bit worse in my eyes, this one actually came up a little bit. Not by a lot, but I'd say it went up an entire tier. So, at its core, I think it's safe to say that this is an MCU revenge movie. This is Natasha, getting her old fake family back together to take out the man who wronged all of them, who brainwashed both her and Yelena into becoming his assassins, who threw Alexei in jail despite the fact that they were basically big business partners. And the mom's a little bit hard to say, if I'm being honest. I don't know if they really clarify, her whole, deal with the guy. What's not hard to say, though, is that the movie's definitely at its best when it's focusing on just Natasha and Yelena. Like, they may not be biologically related, but they still have a clear sisterly bond, and it feels like they're, catching up on lost time, and they even reminisce a little bit. That the movie's emotional core is definitely resides between the two of them, and Florence Pugh gives an excellent performance. She might actually be one of my favorite actresses for her role as Yelena, and also for uh, Goldilocks in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, a movie where and Oppenheimer as well. So two great movies. This one's not as great, but she's definitely a high point of the film. That's not to say that she's the only member of Natasha's family that's enjoyable. Red Guardian is also enjoyable as well. It's easy to tell with both David Harbour and Florence Pugh that they were both having a ton of fun in their roles, especially with David Harbour playing this over the top Russian man who is the first Russian super soldier who apparently faced Captain America, which we know is a lie, but it's still fun to see him on screen just being this awkward dad character of sorts who's very eccentric and clearly having a blast in the role. And they even managed to do a period joke with him that disgusted me the first time because I felt like they were going too far with how despicable Drykov was. Here just made me laugh because of his reaction. Um, Even when you get into the action, Taskmaster is a very intimidating threat, at least when she's on screen. We'll get to that a little bit later. But I do feel like they used her copying ability. I could have worded that better. But it feels like they put her abilities to good use because we see her taking moves from multiple different characters. They show Captain America at one point, Hawkeye, even Black Panther, which is interesting. I don't think I remember that one from the first viewing, but when she brings out her claws and her gloves, that was actually a bit of a surprise. And I'll admit right now, I was way too harsh on Drykov. Like, he's nowhere near the worst villain in the MCU. I mean, yeah, we still have, Ego, fight me, and Malekith, and even like Hulk King recently. Like it goes without saying, there are much worse villains in the MCU than Drykov. At the same time, though, I feel like he's in a bit of a Dar-Benn situation where he's very much a mixed bag. On the one hand, I appreciate that, like with the High Evolutionary, he is a much more disgusting villain, though what he does is to humans and not to animals. So I guess you could make the argument that he's much less evil, though it's still bad. And honestly, that's one reason I wanted to rewatch this movie, is because it didn't really feel right that I was heavily criticizing Drykov for doing something similar to what I ended up praising the High Evolutionary for. So, I can appreciate that he's this diabolical, disgusting, sniveling villain who thinks of everything, even having a pheromonal lock to where people literally cannot attack him if they smell him. That sounded way better in my head than it did out loud. At the same time, though, all it really takes to get rid of that lock is to sever one nerve. And once that happens, he kind of just loses all of his intimidation factor. Like, like once the pheromonal lock is taken out of the equation, like he kind of just becomes a wimp who has to hide behind all of his men, all of his Black Widow assassins. He's not as compelling as a threat anymore. So that is unfortunate, but at the very least, I can say that he is a much better villain than I originally gave him credit for. Now, unfortunately, this movie does have other issues outside of Dreykov being kind of a wuss after the severing of that nerve. Taskmaster, as much as I really like her in the first and third acts, the second act, she's just not in it at all. It's like, I feel like even to the prison where, Alexei was, I mean, maybe that could have caused some complications with the avalanche that happened, but, at least have her show up at some point. Like, maybe have her fight Melina in the house when, all the other members of the family are knocked out. Give us a fight at some point in the second act, but instead she has two standout segments in the first act, where she fights Natasha one-on-one, and then there's the car chase where she puts, the Hawkeye skills to good use. And then she gets some moments in the third act, but there's nothing in the second act. And I feel like that's what holds her back from being a great villain. It's not because, they completely waste her by making her a glorified henchman with a backstory. It's just because she's barely in a large chunk of the movie. Even outside of that, I do think that the emotional core isn't nearly as strong as it could have been, because it feels like it was saved mainly for Natasha and Yelena. For Melina and Alexei, by the time we get to those two, Natasha is so hell-bent on her mission to take down Dreykov that she doesn't even try to reconnect with either of them. I just realized that in my notes, I referred to Alexei as Aleki. That has to be one of the stupidest script mistakes I've ever made. But yeah, I feel like that's really what hurts the emotional core, is that she reconnects with her sister, but she doesn't try to reconnect with her parents. It doesn't feel like a true family reconnection. It feels hollow. It's like with, Captain Marvel, in a sense. That felt hollow because we were rediscovering this person who didn't have much of a personality. Here, the emotional core feels hollow because it feels half-baked. It feels like it's only a third complete. And unfortunately, it doesn't pull out the emotions as much as it could have. They, like that scene at the table, they could have very easily, had an entire moment where, where everyone reminisces about the good times before they split up. Instead, we just get Natasha demanding to know where Dreykov is. And that's really unfortunate, because this could have been, a nice reconnecting family movie. I don't know what that genre of movie is called, but it could have been that. Now, as it is, this is still a pretty good movie. It's far from the worst thing the MCU's put out in Phase 4 or in general. It's definitely middle of the road. It has some good aspects, like, David Harbour and Florence Pugh are having an absolute blast in their roles, and Taskmaster and Dreykov are good villains for what they are. But at the same time, we have a main character who's too hell-bent on her mission to reconnect with, two of the most important people in her childhood. One of the villains is barely in the movie. The main villain loses any stakes, once his biggest asset is removed. And what was the last thing? Actually, that was everything. Yeah. So, yeah, it definitely could have been a better movie, but for what it is, it's pretty good, so I'll give it a solid 3. So, you can definitely do worse. You definitely could have done worse as a Black Widow movie. I was too harsh on it initially. I'm glad I gave it a second chance. And anyways, guys, that was my review on Black Widow. If you enjoyed, you know what to do. I'm not going to bore you with all the generic stuff. I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.